everybody. Welcome back to the Music Buds podcast. This is episode number 30, and my name is Henry. This week, I'm honored to be joined by composer Jesper Kyd, known partly for his work on the Assassin's Creed video game franchise, Borderlands, and the recent film, Tumbbad. Jesper, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to talk. I have loved your work for years, ever since I was a kid, and so thank you for being here.
Thanks, man. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Well, first of all, how is life?
Life is okay. You know, this COVID thing really plays a number on you, doesn't it? I mean, yeah. But I am kind of used to the isolation. You know, being a composer, you spend a lot of time sitting in your studio writing music. But it's kind of heartbreaking to see how it affects, you know, my kids and the family, and of course it affects all of us. You know, the fact that we can't go anywhere really. We can't go out, and you know, you just end up staying home all the time. And yeah, it's, you know, I'm sure I'm in the same boat as most people. Yeah. But again, I am quite lucky to be able to do what I do, because it is a very you know, it's one person in the studio writing away. So nothing has really changed there.
Yeah. With that being said, I want to get to these new projects, but I wanted to ask you, how did you get started with composing? Was music something you always wanted to do?
Not really. I think it's hard to pinpoint. I mean, when I was a kid, we had a piano at home, and I would sit and play with that thing. And whenever we would go visit my family, I have a huge family, so we would, you know, visit all these aunts and uncles and grandparents and all that stuff. And no matter where we went, I swear to you, man, everybody had a piano in their home. And it's kind of weird to look back on it, but it's a very kind of, I don't know if it's a Scandinavian thing or a Danish thing, or maybe it's just kind of, you know, something to do in that time period. But like, you know, you had to have a piano in your home. So everybody had one. So when we were on vacation, you know, if I was 3 weeks with my grandparents, I would kind of get bored, and I would end up sitting with the piano as well. And so I find that that's kind of how I got started. I don't know if that's really what started my interest in music, but that's definitely what started my interest in playing an instrument. Let's see, as far as music, I think it was really kicked into overgear when I got my first computer, which was a Commodore 64. And, you know, this thing was a beast, you know, even though by today's standard, it's really funny. Yeah. But it was the first computer or gaming machine that actually had a analog sound chip inside of it. So instead of making these rudimentary, like, beep sounds that the PC could make at the time, this machine could sing. And the composers on this machine were able to give the games what I felt was a soul. And it was really quite incredible what they were able to achieve. They invented a whole new music style called sit music or chip music or chip tune, you know, whatever you want to call it today. But that music style was invented on the Commodore 64. Right. So it blew my mind, and I would listen to that music all the time and try to figure out, how do I create this kind of music? I just had this need to create this, to figure out how they were doing it. And so what happened is I got involved with what's called a demo scene, which is a bunch of groups and each group, you know, has graphic artists and programmers and musician, right. And then they get together and they make like this 10-minute music video showcasing the talent they have as far as programming 3D, or the graphic artist would do some great logos, and the musicians, of course, would do the music. Yeah. So that was that's kind of how I entered into all that. And my next computer was an Amiga, which had 4 sample channels, and this was all like building up to us starting our own game company.
Mm.
And I was just always doing the music, and since I was 13, I've been doing music with computers. So it felt quite natural that I just kept doing it. Of course, at the same time, I was listening to music outside of computers like Vangelis and Mike
Right.
Oldfield and Jean-Michel Jarre, and they had a huge influence on my early music as well.
Yeah. What about I guess one of the big ones, of course, is Assassin's Creed. How did you get involved with this franchise?
Well, when I was hired on the project, I remember I was at a E3 show, gaming trade show, and Patrice and from Ubisoft was together with Jade Raymond was showing me the game. They only had the concept art and the game design documents as far as what the game was going to be able to do. And I just remember when they showed me that, I couldn't believe it. I had never
Mm.
seen anything as ambitious before. It was like, really, you can stand on this rooftop here and you can see like way out in the distance and go on that rooftop too. I mean, I
Yeah.
couldn't believe that you could traverse the entire environment on foot. It was almost like an open world platform game
Yeah.
that they had invented, and nobody had done anything like this before. GTA 3 had just became 3D at that point, so they were starting to play around with open worlds, but nobody was doing anything like Assassin's Creed. I
Yeah.
was totally blown away by it, and was really happy to be working on that franchise.
Yeah, and I think it was the same for me being a player. I hadn't played a lot of video games up to that point when the first one came out, and I just like you, I was blown away by the world of it and what you could do within it. And so I think that's one of the reasons why it stuck with me for so long.
It's crazy to think about. It came out in 2007,
Yeah.
and when you look at screenshots from, when you see the game run, perhaps you're like, yeah, all right, it's not the same anymore. The quality is better now. But if you look at the screenshots and stuff, the game still looks incredible.
Yeah.
And when I see those, when you have those sequences across the rooftops where the guards are like chasing you and stuff, those are still a ton of fun.
Hmm.
I mean, it's quite insane to think it's 13 years ago, as fast as technology moves in the game industry, that still hold up so well.
Yeah. And I think one of my favorite parts about it is that it does take place in these different historical settings. Like the Assassin's Creed Valhalla is the Viking invasion of Britain, and there's the American Revolution, Renaissance, and many others. Is that something that also draws you in as a composer, or as just someone interested in the project?
Well, the location is definitely very, very interesting to me. I mean, I must admit on Valhalla, I'm also drawn in the fact that it's Ubisoft Montreal, which I've worked with 5 times on
Mm.
other projects. So this was my 6th time working with them, and I just love their games and the quality and the attention to detail they put into their games. But the setting for this one, man, I've always wanted to get in touch with my roots like this. It was really amazing. And yes, the setting is definitely always a big draw. It, especially if I don't know much about the setting, then it becomes so fun because you do all the research. And like when I worked on Assassin's Creed 2, I didn't know anything about the Renaissance, really. I mean, okay, let me rephrase that. I didn't know anything about Renaissance music. It
Sure.
was just not something that was on my radar, probably not on a lot of people's radar, right? So I had to go back and find a way to do a modern version of Renaissance music that people would find interesting and fun to listen to. And those are the great. Those are my favorite types of projects, where I don't really know much about it. I don't know a lot about Viking music either. So going in there and having to figure all this stuff out is so much fun. I remember some of the first music I wrote. The team was like, this music is too dark, uh, you know, and I was thinking, really, because when you think about Viking music, I just had a tendency to think, something really dark sounding with these dark pulses,
Yeah.
and that's kind of Viking music, right? But of course they're right. I mean, the game doesn't always engage in that behavior. You're not always on a mission. You're not, always fighting. There has to be an atmosphere and music for when you are exploring the map. And so that was one of the big challenges, was to figure out how to write Viking music that doesn't have these dark tones to it. So that was really so much fun to work on, and that has to do with drawing inspiration from the history of the Vikings. They have a very rich, afterlife system, right? I mean,
Right.
it just goes on, and they have all these different gods. So I was definitely inspired by all of that, and the spirituality that they felt as well, and that helped me write a more kind of ethereal, at times even uplifting, music for when you're exploring and stuff.
Yeah, and as we were just talking about, I think your interest in delving into something you don't know about was the same for me as a player, being a fan of history. Going into Valhalla, I didn't really know much about this era, but it sparked a curiosity in me to learn more. And I wanted to make sure to tell you, because you had touched on Assassin's Creed 2, the tracks from that game, Florence Tarantella and Tour of Venice. I wanted to make sure to tell you, it's pretty rare that a day goes by that I don't listen to those songs. And I just wanted to tell you how special they were for me for years. And this is a franchise that it really sparked a curiosity in me for history and culture. And I just wanted to make sure to pass on to you how much they've impacted me, with your music being very much a part of it.
Oh man, that's great to hear. Thank you for mentioning that. That's awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah. Thank you. And well, now with Valhalla having done so many of these, with so many installments now at this point, is the not keeping it fresh, but like, is there a different process going into each one in terms of variety of music, or is it really just the setting, the historical setting that calls for the style and sound of the music?
Well, for Valhalla, it was definitely different. Perhaps between Assassin's Creed 2 and Brotherhood, you would think it wasn't different. But then again, that was different too, because for Brotherhood, you suddenly had the Borgia, and this whole Borgia thing meant that all this really kind of uplifting music I wrote for Assassin's Creed 2 is now getting really dark, But yeah, especially for Valhalla, I mean, the game is huge, and it takes place outdoors in hostile environments. Of course, the other games take place outdoors too, but it doesn't feel the same because, the first, I don't know, I worked on the first four Assassin's Creed games, and there was a lot of cities in those games. So, within those cities, you're kind of more, the danger of the environment comes from different things, and it's not like there's don't misunderstand. It's not like there's a rainstorm in Valhalla that's going to kill you. That's not
Right.
what I mean. I just mean when you look at it, you're thinking that looks pretty cold. I'm probably going to freeze if that kind of thing was a huge part of the score for Valhalla, to create something that just felt, very like environmental, with these huge areas and mountains covered in snow and ice and thick forests and rivers and so that it was more of the nature part of it had a huge influence on the music, and I ended up writing some really I feel what I went for is something really vast and epic and a bit slower, with big reverbs that really just kind of makes a statement about how vast everything is.
Yeah.
And that is a very different sound from the previous Assassin's Creed games I've worked on.
Yeah, I would agree, and I that's what I think is so interesting, because it is grand and epic, but also it has this kind of textural kind of underlying openness to it. And that adds that really, it took me by surprise when I first heard because I heard your music even before I played the game. And that's what kind of took me by surprise in a good way. It was
Cool.
something I hadn't, yet encountered. And so I thought that was great.
I hadn't I hadn't encountered it either. You know what I mean? Because
Yeah.
The way this score had to be written, I realized pretty early on that writing for these ancient instruments, creating something authentic was like the number one thing that we were aiming for. And so I acquired all these ancient instruments and was trying to figure out how to compose for them. And so I started playing them. And then suddenly I play them and play them and play them. And I'm like, hey, I'm just going to perform all these instruments myself. And so that's something I haven't done before. I've performed instruments myself before on my scores, but this time I performed pretty much almost all of it. I have a couple of percussionists who worked with me, but I also did a ton of live percussion for it. I think Kingdom of Wesset has a guitarist I like to use. Other than that, everything is live, and I ended up playing everything. So that was really kind of mind-boggling for me.
Yeah. And now with some of the games you've worked on it solo, but with this game, there were a couple of collaborators. What
Right.
was that process like?
Yeah. So we were designated different areas of the game. So for the environments, I composed the music for East Anglia, Wessex, Northumbria, Norway, and the future present Animus music. And Sarah composed for other environments. And then we both composed music for the cinematics. We both composed the music for all the mission music and the combat music. And I thought it was a really great thing because the way it was done was like this. So we need a stealth cue over here, and then they would ask both of us to write that stealth cue. So there is like double the amount of all the cues. We've each had our own interpretation of that cue. So for the mission music, that's how that worked. And I thought that was really cool because then we both get to do all these different atmospheres and intensities in the music and stuff.
Yeah.
Then we both collaborated on the main title. I wrote the first version of that, had some great talks with Simon Landry at Ubisoft. And I handed it off to Sarah for her to keep writing on it and also produce it. And then Einar Selvik came in and did vocals for it.
Cool.
So that was a lot of fun. And then finally I did Ezio's Family, Ascending to Valhalla, where I also worked with Einar Selvik on the vocals.
Now, what about like with the series having covered so many different settings already? Are there any particular historical settings not yet explored in the franchise that you would like to delve into?
I would love to see them take Assassin's Creed to India. That's just a personal preference. I think India is one of the most interesting countries, and the culture there and the history there. We don't know a lot about it, and I can just love to learn more about India through playing Assassin's Creed, right?
Yeah. There you go.
Yeah.
I guess we can. I do want to make sure to touch on this movie, Tumbbad. How did you get involved with this?
So Adesh Prasad, who is the co-director on the movie, reached out to me. He told me later on, after we had finished working together, that he had been listening to my Hitman music, and it was specifically a track called Apocalypse that he thought was really cool. And so he was looking to bring something really unique and epic to the project. And so he reached out. I asked to see what they were working on. He sent me an early edit of the film, and I just could not believe what he sent me. I mean, this was just, to me, I mean, it's totally groundbreaking. I don't think there's ever been a movie like that made in India before, and I am not the only one saying this.
Right.
I mean, I think this is pretty much a fact. It's become like a cult movie in India, and especially since it was put on Amazon Prime, it's really flourished. It's so that's how that whole thing started, and I'm so proud to be involved with that movie. It's such a great movie.
It is, yeah. Is the process for doing a movie any different for you than doing a video game franchise or a video game?
It's very different. It almost couldn't be more different. And that's just because I grew up in the game industry. I started making music when I was 13, and my first game soundtrack came out when I was 17. And I founded a game company with my friends when I was, I don't know, 18 or 19 or something. So I spent a lot of my teenage years working on games. A lot of the early things I did wasn't released. But anyway, so I come from the perspective of video games, and then I transitioned into also creating film scores. And for me, that's a very different journey. And so let's see, what's the best way to explain this? I mean, it's not as easy as it sounds. So, but okay, let me talk about it this way.
All right.
With video games, you have a lot of creative freedom. Like, let's talk about Valhalla. So you're exploring the environment. You're not engaged in a mission. You're free to do what you want. Of course, if you run into some guards or whatever, the combat music could switch. But let's just say you're just exploring. That music isn't designed to follow every micro change in the gameplay. It's not like you're running, you're walking, you look left. There's still the same music, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
But in a film, you have to be aware of those things. Oh, he starts running, the music might already be changing. So you have so much freedom in games, and I love that about games. And this is why I always love working on game soundtracks. It's almost like writing concert music, when you write these 3-4 minute, exploration cues, for example. Then if I'm working on a film, it's very different, because suddenly, you're looking at a scene, and within 30 seconds, so much can happen in that 30 seconds that you have to score. Somebody is sitting down, somebody gets up, somebody starts running, they go across the street, there's a car going by, and then we shoot to the bakery, and from the bakery we look out and there's the guy running. Whatever. Yeah. I mean, all these scenes have to have, you have to be, it's not that you have to change necessarily the music all the time, but you have to be aware of it so that the beat hits the right places and all these kind of things. And going back to games, if you're on a mission, and let's say there's some suspense, and then the guards, they didn't find you after all, they would go back to some ambient, and then perhaps there's some tension because the guard is right next to you, but you're hidden behind a curtain, and then he finds you, and then it's combat. So all those I just described 4 game states. Those game states all need long pieces of music, because what if the game player wants to stay hidden behind that curtain for 2 minutes until that guard has walked all the way out of the room?
Right.
So you're writing these, you can deep dive in games, you can deep dive into each emotion. So suspense, I can play around with 2 or 3 minute suspense cue and really get deep into the whole suspense thing. For a film, you go there for 10 seconds and off you go to the next mood. But again, film is fun because you get to follow the story and you get to collaborate really closely with the director. And it's in games, you work with audio departments. I mean, it really couldn't be more different. But I enjoy both. I really do.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that it is so interesting with video games because it is particular to the player. And with
Right.
especially with these games being so huge, I mean, there's just endless possibilities for how that music could be injected into the game.
Right. I mean, you really have to zoom out, and kind of try to score every possible thing that you can think of the game player doing
Hmm.
without micro scoring. You know what I mean? You don't want to score the gameplay. Like if he starts running, you don't want to change the music, because then you stop and run and stop and run, and it's like, whoa, it's really annoying to listen to that kind of thing.
Right.
But you have to really zoom out and just kind of think about what should the score support, you know?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a million things we could talk about with your work. I did just want to ask you, with this year coming to a close, are you much of a film watcher, a gamer, or do you tend to stay pretty busy to where you don't have the time for those kind of things?
Oh, I watch a ton of films and TV shows. I really love that world, and I feel like there's so much to learn in that world because I've spent so much time of my life writing music for games, and I feel I have a quite good understanding of what makes a good game score. Um, with Tumbbad, I feel this was really the first time that I was able to express uh, what I wanted to express 100% without any compromises.
Hmm.
It's easy to be involved with a film project and run into compromises. Sometimes there's so many cooks in the kitchen. It's
Mhm.
and you support the story. That is, of course, always the most important thing. So there's more landmines, in film scoring. But I'm feeling that I'm starting to get to a place with my film music where I'm really where I really can draw on my experience in uh, video game music, and I feel it's almost like a luxury. I've been really lucky to been writing all these fantasy and sci-fi scores, for years, and really got to explore and experiment um, with so much music and so many scores and games, and taking that all those things I've learned and putting it into a film score is what I'm trying to achieve with my film music. And I think Tumbbad, we got there, and yeah, it perhaps sounds like, well, of course you should just be able to do that. But I really had to start over when I started scoring film, because it's a totally different mindset when you're scoring a film. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jesper, is there any? I mean, again, we could talk for a long time. Is there anything in particular that I haven't touched on? Anything coming up that you would like to make people aware of, or have we touched on some of the big points?
I think we're good. I mean, feel free to ask any questions you have. It's totally fine. What's coming next for me is I'm working on a feature fantasy film, which is animation.
Hmm.
Been working on that one for a bit, and it's again, it's a totally different experience because they spend like hours and hours rendering each frame. It's just such a so it couldn't be more different, really, from
Yeah.
from working on Assassin's Creed Valhalla. So, but again, I mean, that's what I'm always looking for. If I can keep doing all these different projects, then I can challenge myself, and then I learn a lot. When you challenge yourself, you learn a lot. And so every time I do a project, everything I learn, I bring to the next project, and also when I work on a film, everything I learn from scoring film, I take to games and back and forth. So that's kind of how that works.
Yeah. Is it okay if I ask you a little bit about Assassin's Creed 2 or some of the early games? Is that all
Yeah,
right?
shoot, of course.
Well, I think Assassin's Creed 2. I think that was the one I first played, and then I went back and played the first one. What was it like doing, that Renaissance period? Because it's so lavish and rich, and of course the music speaks to that as well. What was it like going into that world?
Well, one of the things that really blew me away about Assassin's Creed 2, and again, I mean, Assassin's Creed 1 blew me away, but I mean, when they introduced Assassin's Creed 2 to me, I could not believe what they were showing me, because so I'm at Ubisoft Montreal, and they're showing me these early tests demos of what they want to achieve with the second one, and it was all about like romantic lighting and romantic settings, and I just could not believe we have a game called Assassin's Creed. You play an assassin, and there's so much focus on creating atmosphere and lighting, and I was just totally in love with that, and realized right from the moment I saw that this was going to have to be a very atmospheric score. It needed to support that whole vision they had. And of course, Ezio and his storyline was a huge inspiration as well. Earth was the first track I wrote for the game, and of course inspired by the story of Ezio and his loss of his father and his two brothers in such a public event, and Ezio not knowing anything about what they had done and why they were guilty.
Yeah.
So that became, of course, Ezio's family, because we were recording with an orchestra here at Capitol Records, and we had the orchestra, and I was like, why don't we do an orchestral version of Earth? So I rewrote the track, and we didn't even have a place to put it in the game. It was just something that people on the team agreed with me. There was really a great feeling about that track, Earth, and I've been told this as well, that the team really liked this track, so I thought it was a good idea, and they backed me up on that, and suddenly it opens the game, and it becomes this I don't know, I guess iconic theme for the whole franchise.
Yeah. And with that game, and it's present in every one, but really, as you were saying, like, just walking through a city street in that game was like, I didn't even have to be doing anything. I could just be walking around, and I felt like I was completely immersed in that world. And the level of historical detail was like, I just can't imagine how people could actually create that within a game.
It's a beautiful time period. I mean, it really is, like, right? I mean, it's some of the most, artistic time in human history. And with all the new inventions and the history of all the paintings that were done back then, and it was just such a culturally rich history to tap into. And again, I mean, I wanted to create music that, in addition to the world, I want to create music that kept you in that world, and is like, you don't want to leave that world, because you enjoy the atmosphere. And of course, the music is a huge part of that atmosphere, on top of all the great lighting and the beautiful environments and architecture and all that stuff. But that was very much the goal, with that.
Yeah. Last thing, and I mean, it's fairly broad, so if you don't have a specific answer right now, that's okay. Are there any tracks across any of the games in particular that maybe strike you as your favorite, or having had a particularly interesting creation to it?
Well, for Valhalla, I really loved bringing Melissa Kaplan back for Kingdom of Wessex. She sung on Assassin's Creed 1, 2, Brotherhood, and Revelations. So she was the voice of Assassin's Creed on my music there. And to see her back, especially after Ezio's family has become this theme of the franchise, I felt it was really important to bring her voice back. So that was super exciting for me. I think another one I really like is the Frozen North. That's a hard track to define, but I think with that track, that was also one of the early tracks. With that one, I think I really found something that felt like, okay, this is about I mean, I don't know, this felt very authentic to the time period, while at the same time it still has, vocals and melody, but it felt like, I listened to that track and I gotta go get my jacket, I'm just like cold listening to it, and I was like, all right, we achieved it. This feels, this is very much made for the environment. And then, Kingdom of Wessex evolved a bit because that's from that. And it still needed to be authentic, but it's more melodic, So it has more parts in it. But yeah, Frozen North was also one of the early tracks.
Yeah. All right. Well, Jesper, thank you so much again for taking the time. As I've said, this franchise it's been my favorite my whole life, and your music is very much a reason for that. And it's something that as I've said, I enjoy it day in and day out. And so I can't thank you enough for how your work has impacted me over the years.
Oh man, thanks, dude. That's really great to hear.
Yeah. And please come back anytime. Hope to have you on some other time if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah. Let's do it.
All right, everybody. I think that is about it for the show. Please follow the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at The Music Buds. Check out themusicbuds.com. And we hope you enjoyed it as much as we did. And we'll see you next time.